Hi, welcome to the Shepherd's Rest Doc Talk. This is episode 92A.
I'm Cam and this is Julie.
You have no idea how hard it was to get through that.
Hello and welcome to this week's Torah portion. We're 7 minutes into this recording.
Because I couldn't get it right.
And we are in Leviticus. We are going from Leviticus 12 all the way to 15. This is a double portion. So if you are on our Facebook page, you'll see we posted last year's, but it's actually going to be 4 postings because there were 2 A's and 2 B's, and then there'll be this week. So if you want to watch it all, you got a lot to take in.
And what is it called?
It's called Tazria and Metzora. Yay! And so they're put together.
Yes.
The topic really, though, if we back up and we look at Leviticus 8 and then we go up to 16, we really get, I think, a fuller picture of what's going on with this week. And you can't really separate, I think, the last few weeks because the goal is how to draw near to the Lord.
Yes.
We have in chapter 8, well, actually, I guess for that matter, we could go all the way back to Genesis 1, but Leviticus 1, where we are shown how to draw near with the offerings. But remember, that couldn't be done until the priesthood came in, so that's why we go and say the Leviticus 8 is really the starting point, because those things between 1 and 7 couldn't happen until chapter
the
8.
Establishment of the priesthood.
Right,
Yes.
until the priesthood were established so they could do their part of the go-between.
That's why Paul says we can go boldly before the throne of grace, because once Yeshua went into his priesthood,
Absolutely.
and we were established, now we can have that closeness.
Right, that was not possible to the extent that it is today. So we see in chapter 8 where, again, the inauguration's going on. We have 9 where they're drawing near. We have 10 where that drawing near fire comes down. Boom, right? Mm-hmm. And then not so good second fire shoots out and kills Nahab and Abihu. Yeah. And then we have in 10:10 where he's like, go and teach everyone how to be clean, how to draw near, the difference between clean and unclean so that they can draw near. And even at the end of chapter 11, we see in 47, it says, to make a distinction between the clean and unclean, between the living creatures that are eaten and the living creatures that are not eaten. So again, chapter 11, all about food, is that clean and unclean. And now we start moving into 12, 13, 14, 15, that really looks at more of the clean and unclean. I would suggest that the understanding, if we pull back, of all of these unclean events all have to do with death. So it's really life and death. We have Nahab and Abihu who had death, but the Lord wanted it to be life. But through their death, the Lord is going to allow this to be taught for life for everyone. Now look, I would suggest this is not the first time they've heard this, because in Leviticus 5, the guilt offering is understood to be brought when you touch something unclean, you've been around something unclean, when you've been unclean and you contaminated other people. That's the guilt offering. They're discussing clean and unclean. Well, remember the first time we see this is back with Noah.
Right.
He knew the difference between clean and unclean animals. Well, for what reason? Because you gave them to the Lord, and I won't get into the whole eating discussion, but regardless, there's clean and unclean, and that was significant back with Noah. He brought that through when he came through the waters as still important. Here we see Israel coming through the waters, and they're bringing the understanding of clean and unclean, and the Lord's making sure that it is clear. I think it's Psalms 24:4 where he says, who can ascend the mountain? But those, the one who has clean hands, a pure heart, and has not given himself to an idol or to vanity. All right. This is who's drawing near. And 24 of Psalms talks about the gates opening up and singing, and here comes the king. That is all millennial and also, I would say, eternal. But you see this in Revelation 21, where the gates will be open on Sabbath and on the new moons, and at these times for the nations to be able to come in. Right. We see in this week's Torah portion that there are varying degrees of cleanliness. And, well, I guess not cleanliness, but uncleanliness. Is that a word? Okay. So, I started thinking and I thought, the verse that says cleanliness is next to godliness, though that's not in the Bible.
Yeah.
If you really study Torah, that concept, I see where it comes from.
Uh-huh.
Because you must be clean in order to draw near. So to be
And
next to
so
God,
really
you have
it is
to
cleanliness
you have
is
to
next
be
to godliness.
yes. It's not the shower like what we think of, but it's having your heart right. It's having not being contaminated with the things of the world. So we see where there are those who are unclean who cannot go even in any part of the camp, like a leper, okay?
Right.
He must go completely outside the camp because anything he does can contaminate someone who's wanting to go to the temple. And really all of these unclean either contaminates the person who has it or they can be a contaminant to someone around them, all right? There are those who are just a contaminant to themselves, someone who has had to pick up a dead animal or a couple who's had intercourse, okay, they're just contaminated themselves. They're not contaminating their children or their neighbors or and they go to work that day. They're not contaminating anyone. That is a self-contained contamination, okay? But you have others where you maybe picked up a dead body or you've done other things that contaminate you that may be contaminable to others. Example, let's say I was unclean from something, I don't know what. And so Julie and I can talk to Julie, whatever, interact with her. There's not a problem. However, a priest couldn't come and hang out with me because they have a higher degree of cleanliness or holiness. Yeah, separation they must keep than I do. So there's different levels. It depends on what your roles are. All of these clean and unclean events have to do with drawing near to the Lord, going into the temple tabernacle. It's not that these aren't significant because we are held to preserve and to guard all of Torah. That means we guard these things and preserve them. Mm-hmm. But there are issues like a woman in her menstruation that is not going to have the same bearing today as it will when there's a temple or when Messiah is reigning, okay? We don't have a way to become cleansed if we touch a dead body.
Right.
Because there's no red heifer right now.
Yeah.
So we couldn't draw near anyway. When there's going to be a temple, there's going to have to be a red heifer. You can read about that in Numbers 19. I bring that up because a lot of the events that take place with the red heifer, we see a very common theme between the red heifer, between the priest being inaugurated, between the leper being cleansed, and with Yom Kippur. There are elements of them all being interchanging, okay? I would say because all of these things have to do with the setting free of individuals in a nation, allowing them to draw closer. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we see the priest in chapter 8 of Leviticus and the leper in chapter 14 of Leviticus, and the ceremonies are so similar. For 7 days, they're outside the tent. Then on the 8th day, their officiation is complete. Mm-hmm. They both have the blood put on their ear, their thumb, and their toes. They both have the oil put on them. They are both basically being cleansed so they can draw near. The priesthood is a one group, right? I guess a collective group. But the leper is individuals.
I see.
Same thing we see chapter 16 with Yom Kippur is for the nation. But the red heifer are individuals. Mm-hmm. So the Lord makes sure that
you see Messiah written all over that.
Oh, absolutely. Messiah was our red heifer so that individuals could come in. He's also the Yom Kippur so that the nation,
Israel,
right,
can be established.
Yeah, we see with the leper, we have the same elements of the. Actually, you have the same elements with the leper as you do with the red heifer, because again, that's the individual and the individual. The leper, those are the two individuals. Then you look at Yom Kippur, and there are elements of Yom Kippur with the leper, and that's because individuals make up the nation. See, what we see repeating each other there is we have two birds, one is killed and one lives. Mm-hmm. And Yom Kippur, chapter 16, we have two goats. One dies, one lives. It's when you start to see the patterns, and then you keep reading this over and over, oh my gosh, they just keep jumping out.
They do jump out. Yes. I was doing that when I was reading my Torah portion this week. I was like, there's so many patterns, I don't know what to talk about.
I know, it's like my head was spinning, I saw another great pattern, and it had to do with red and white.
Okay.
So in chapter 13, where the priests are called, not a doctor, but a priest, is called to look at the skin, the eruptions that are going to be declared clean or unclean, yes, leprosy or not leprosy, all right? If it's not leprosy, they're clean. If it's is leprosy, they're unclean. And these spots, the way they know that it's leprosy is they look at it and it has a white hair. I'm like, a white hair, okay. A white hair.
It's dead.
It has to be white.
Yeah.
And it has to be with raw flesh. Well, what color is raw flesh? What color is raw flesh? Red.
Red.
So we have a white
hair,
and then we have this red
flesh,
which I'm thinking, from scarlet red to white as snow. And as you start to look at the pattern in 13, he's always looking for white, a white hair, and then if it's completely turning white, if it's just all white and that's it, the person's clean. The person can be from head to toe white with leprosy, completely white, you're clean. So that's not declared a healing to be all white.
Okay.
Like it's not, they don't say he's clean, and they don't say he's healed. They just say he's declared clean.
Right.
But in chapter 14, we see where when the leper comes and is healed,
okay,
then they declare him clean. So there must be two different things. In other words, the one who's healed, who's declared clean in chapter 14, goes through another process that lets him draw into the tabernacle. Into the tabernacle. So now he can not only just come into the camp, but he can also come into the tabernacle. So when you have the one who's all white, who's being declared clean, they can go into the camp. That's what it is. They go into the camp, but they can't go into the tabernacle.
If they're all white.
Okay. But
so the one who's healed not only gets to come into fellowship, they get to draw near to the Lord.
Yes. Their drawing near is complete.
Yes.
Versus the one who's all white gets to fellowship, but not it's not complete yet.
It's not complete.
And he's always having to watch. He's always on guard for what's going to break out. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So as I mentioned before, how all of the uncleanliness here has to do with death. And you can't have death in the tabernacle or in the temple. So I thought we'd look real quick at, let's go to chapter 11, talking about food. That's considered, these foods are unclean.
Again with the food.
Well, if unclean has to do with things that bring death, and he says these foods are unclean, then I would suggest that these foods he says don't eat actually will bring death to our bodies. Which scientifically people are finding out all the time that they do.
Yes.
Well, he already knew that. And we should have known that immediately when we understood what clean and unclean was doing.
Yes.
So he's like, don't eat these things, they're unclean. Well, think about messing with dead things. If you don't properly take care of yourself with good hygiene, that is the risk of bringing death to you. Disease, right? Death. So all those things you see in chapter 11 where an animal falls into your earthen pot, right? You just destroy the pot because that death has just sat there and it's absorbed it. Again, it has to do with life. Unclean and clean. So when we look at childbirth, okay, I know people are like, well, what's that? Well, there is a part of the body that is dying when you give birth. You've got the placenta, you've got all these pieces that have had life, rich blood going to it regularly, that now no longer has blood going to it. There's death there. Also,
but the death gives life.
Absolutely. Through death gives life. We know this through Messiah. We know this through, seeds, all the patterns that the Lord has there
being
for us
born
to see.
again.
Yes. We must die to ourselves to be born again. Absolutely. Then we have the leper. The biggest thing with leprosy, I would say, because you have a lot of people who have not a lot of people. You have people in the time who are in the outside of the city, okay, who had leprosy, but it wasn't like arms falling off. It's not that kind of leprosy, but it was a death to relationship. It was a death to relationship between the leper and people.
To the life that you just knew.
Yes, and between the leper and the Lord. All right, so there's a death in a relationship there.
It's like it's the opposite of a priest. The priests are set apart for this reason.
Yes.
And then the lepers are set apart, but it's the total opposite reason.
Yes, and look how cool that is, though. That leper
has to go to the priest.
Yes, and they have to work together for him to come back over. And
it's like Judah working with Ephraim, or not?
Oh
Ephraim,
my gosh,
Dan.
yes.
Remember a few weeks
really
ago?
Ephraim too, because
Judah working with Dan. The highest working with the lowliest.
Right, yes, come
together. So even in leprosy, even in that separation, the Lord is teaching us the highest still has to work, the holiest still has to work with. No wonder Yeshua went and touched lepers all the time.
Yes, and he's considered in Isaiah 53 to be king of the lepers.
Oh,
yeah. Okay, so on that note, here's another thing. You have the priest and you have the leper, the highest and lowest, okay?
Yeah.
And they change. This unclean one becomes clean, and this clean one becomes unclean. The priest becomes unclean because when he's declaring the cleanliness. Yeah. Okay, isn't that what Messiah did?
Yes.
Messiah
he took on our sin so we could be without sin.
And then he took on death so we could have life. He took on our illness so we could have healing.
All of this so we could understand Messiah.
Yes.
When he comes.
Exactly. Yet we go, clean, unclean, who cares? No. We want to still walk in the ways that we can. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were good back then. They're still good now. All right. We may not get the full benefit because we don't have a temple. But again, we see this really interesting thing in Revelation 21 and in Revelation 22. In Revelation 22, it says that the dogs are outside the city.
Yeah.
They're in eternity, but they are considered, listen to this, they're the ones who are enchanted with drugs. So enchantment, that's witchcraft.
Right.
They're whoring.
Right.
They're murderers.
And they love falsehood.
Yes, but those three things are all death. Death is the response. Leprosy is considered death because you have to go outside the camp. There are people refusing to attach themselves to Israel.
Yes.
But still have eternal salvation.
That's so funny. I'm going to talk about that in my talk.
Of course.
Numbers 15.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. So they are refusing to attach, okay? Mm-hmm. They are doing the ways of the world. They're unclean, and their punishment is death. Yet, the Lord allowed them eternal salvation to be in eternity, but they can't draw near because they didn't have any cleanliness. Because in Revelation 21, it says, everything that's unclean stays out. Nothing unclean can come into the city
of New Jerusalem.
Right. It can be in the world, but it can't be in the new city. So I would suggest what we see in eternity in New Jerusalem is the city, hence the tabernacle.
Yes.
The camp.
Uh-huh.
And then outside of the camp.
Yeah,
and let's remember this, there are no oceans in eternity, which means we're back to one landmass, which means it literally can be like a camp. Yeah. It's not like you got to figure out who's on what continent.
Right.
You're all together.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. So this really does pertain even to eternity. This is so important for us to read and learn and look at. Well, that's it for this week. We thank you so much for joining us. I know that we are kind of all over the place, but a part of that was because what we're showing on Facebook from last year, which is episode 40 and 41A, and then 40 and 41B, have so many details because it was single.
2 different portions.
Right, and now it's
put
one.
Together.
So anyway, I hope the overview kind of helps as you go and study throughout the week and give you some insight as far as what direction maybe to go.
All right.
We thank you, and we hope you have a fantastic week. And we'll see you on the flip side with Julie and the prophets. Shalom!
Tazria,
Metzora,
Torah Incorporated. We're gonna do it.
Let's sing about the Torah. Let's do a Doc Talk episode and see what we might learn. Because we have no idea what we're going to talk about.
Doing it our way.